The barn was cold that morning, and I remember the sound of the buggy wheels on the frozen dirt more than I remember anything anyone said. 2 families had come. 2 mothers I had known my whole life stood in my kitchen with their hands folded, not looking at me because they knew what I did not yet fully understand. My husband had been dead 4 months. The snow had come and gone twice since we buried him. And on that table, where I had rolled out pie dough 10,000 times, where my children had eaten every meal of their small lives, sat the papers that would decide which of my children I would keep and which ones would be given away. Before I go any further, I am Anna. I am 84 years old, and this is Hannah, the Amish girl, the channel where I finally speak the things we were never permitted to say out loud. I grew up Old Order Amish in Holmes County, Ohio, in a time most of you cannot imagine, when a widow with 7 children and no husband was not a tragedy to be helped, but a problem to be solved. My hands shake now when I hold a cup of coffee, but my memory of that winter has never shaken once, not in 73 years. If you want to hear the truth about Amish life from someone who lived nearly a whole century inside it, subscribe and press like, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight. I read every single one, even now, with these old eyes. Let me take you back. It was the winter of 1952. I was a young mother then, though I do not feel young in any of these memories. I had married Eli when I was 19. He was a good man, quiet, with hands that were always working, hands that could gentle a frightened horse and cradle a newborn in the same hour. We built a life the way you build a stone wall, one heavy piece at a time, and by the time I was 31, we had 7 children. Sarah, the oldest, was 12. Then came the boys, Mose and Amos and little Eli. Then the little girls, Barbara, Katie, and the baby, Mary, who was not yet 2. 7 children under one roof, 7 pairs of shoes by the door, 7 small breaths I could hear in the dark if I stood still in the hallway at night. That was my wealth. That was the only wealth we had. You must understand something about the world I lived in. There was no insurance. There was no government check that came in the mail. When a man died, his farm and his debts did not die with him. And Eli died in March, when the ground was still hard, crushed beneath a wagon that slipped on the ice not 2 miles from our house. A neighbor came to the door with his hat in his hands, and I knew before he said a single word, the way a woman always knows. I did not scream when they told me. Amish women of my generation did not scream. I put on the black dress, and I have worn some version of black for the rest of my life. I fed my children supper that night because they were hungry, and hunger does not stop for grief. That is the first thing widowhood teaches you. The work does not pause to let you fall apart. Here is what the outside world does not understand about the Amish in those years. The community takes care of its own. That is true, and it is beautiful, and it is also more complicated than the picture on the postcard you buy at the roadside stand. The church would not let my children starve. No one in Holmes County went hungry while their neighbors had bread. But a woman could not run a 100-acre farm alone with 7 small children, and the Ordnung, our unwritten but iron code, had an answer for a widow like me. The answer was not charity as you would think of it. The answer was that the children would be placed, distributed, given to families who had room, who had need of hands, who could raise them in the faith and lighten the load on the widow who could not carry it alone. They did not call it giving them away. No one ever used those words. They called it a blessing. They called it the community carrying its burden together. The bishop came to my house on a Tuesday, and he sat where my husband used to sit, in the chair Eli had built with his own hands, and he told me that God does not give us more than we can bear, and that the good families of the district were ready to receive my little ones and raise them as their own. He said it gently. He was not an unkind man. That is the part I need you to hold on to through this whole story. Almost no one in it was unkind. That is what has made it impossible to set down. I asked him how many I could keep. He looked at his hands for a long time. The clock ticked on the wall. And then he told me the farm could support the baby, because a nursing mother needs her infant, and it could support the oldest girl, Sarah, because I needed one strong pair of hands to help me hold what was left. 2, I could keep 2. The other 5 would go to other homes, some in our district, some as far as Indiana and Pennsylvania, where I might see them once a year, or once in several years, or in the case of the youngest boys, perhaps not again until they were grown men, I would not recognize on the road. I want you to sit with that the way I have had to sit with it for 73 years. I was told to choose, not which dress to sew, not which field to plant or which cow to sell, which of my children would stay children in my house, and which would become the children of other women, which faces I would watch grow old, and which I would lose to time and distance and other mothers' kitchens. I did not sleep for 3 nights. I walked the floor of that farmhouse with the baby on my hip, going from bed to bed, looking at each sleeping face by the light of a single lamp turned down low, and I understood that I was doing something no mother should ever be made to do. I was measuring them. God forgive me, I was standing over my own babies in the dark, measuring which ones I could bear to lose, which one clung the most, which one would suffer the most in a stranger's house, which one was strong enough to survive being sent away. A mother is not built to do that arithmetic, but I did it night after night because no one else would do it for me. Now, before I tell you what I decided, and I will tell you, I need to say something honestly, because I have promised you the truth and not the postcard. What happened over the next 11 Sundays, I cannot carry it in 20 minutes. There are things this recording cannot hold. The names, the counting, the drawer, the dress I kept for 27 years. 3 years ago, I wrote it all down, every piece of it, the parts I have never said aloud to anyone. The book is called The Sundays. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. If you cannot bear to hear the rest tonight, I understand, but the whole of it is there, waiting for whoever needs it. Now, let me tell you about the choosing. Sarah, my oldest, I kept because the bishop had already said so, and because at 12 she was already half a woman, already able to knead bread and mind the little ones and pin a diaper without waking the child. She had her father's quiet in her. The baby, Mary, I kept because she was still at my breast and could not be weaned to a stranger. Those 2 were decided for me, and in a strange way that was a mercy, because it meant I only had to break my own heart 5 times instead of 7. When you are given no choice at all, at least the guilt is not yours to carry. It is the choosing that stains you. The boys were the first to go. Mose was 10 and Amos was 8, and a family in our district who had lost their own sons to the fever needed farm hands and had love to give. They were good people. I knew the wife's mother. I told myself that was the easiest one, because they would stay close, because I would see them at church every other Sunday across the room. I did not understand yet that seeing your child across a room, unable to hold him, unable to have him run to you and bury his face in your apron, is its own particular kind of grief. A child you can see but cannot keep is a wound that never closes, because it is opened fresh every single Sunday for the rest of your life. I would have traded seeing them for a clean goodbye more times than I can count. Little Eli, who carried his father's name, went to Indiana. He was 6. A childless couple, good people, wanted a son to raise in the faith, and they had asked the bishop for a boy. When the buggy came for him, he did not cry, because he did not understand. He thought he was going on a visit. I had packed his small things in a flour sack and told him he was going on an adventure. God forgive me, because I could not bear to tell him the truth. He waved to me from the back of that wagon with his whole small arm, so proud to be going somewhere, and I stood in the doorway, and I waved back, and I smiled, because I would not let him see my face break. I held that smile until the wagon was out of sight past the fence line, and then I went into the barn where no one could hear me, and I made a sound I did not know a person could make. I have waved to a great many things leaving in my life. That is the wave I still see when I close my eyes at night. Then there were the little girls, Barbara and Katie, 5 and 4. And this is where I must tell you the truth about myself, the truth I have carried like a stone in my apron pocket for the rest of my days, the truth that even the bishop never knew. There was room for one more. After the boys and little Eli were placed, the bishop came back and told me that one family, a kind family from a district over, could take only a single girl, and that they had asked for one of mine. One, not both. Barbara and Katie were sisters who had never slept a night apart in their lives. They shared a bed. They shared a language of their own that only sisters have, whole conversations in half words and glances, and I was being asked to send one of them into a wagon and keep the other beside me, to break not just my heart, but theirs, to tear apart the one thing they had left in all the world, which was each other. I have never told anyone how I chose. I will not fully tell it here either, because some things a person must write down in a quiet room over 3 years, and cannot say into a machine with a light shining in her face. But I will tell you this much. I chose with my body before I chose with my mind. When the moment came, when the wagon was in the yard and the time for thinking was over, one of them was clinging to my skirt, gripping the fabric in both small fists, and one of them had wandered to the window to watch the horses, the way a child does, distracted by something bright in a moment that would decide her whole life. And the hand does what the heart cannot say. I reached down, I picked up the one at my skirt, and the other turned from the window and saw and understood, in the way that even a 4-year-old understands, that her mother's hands had already decided without her. That is the thing about being made to choose. There is no righteous way to do it. There is no version where you come out clean. Whatever I chose, I was also unchoosing. Every child I pulled close was a child I pushed away. I have turned that moment over 10,000 times, asking whether I chose right, and I have never once found an answer, because there was no right. There was only the choosing and the living with it afterward. Now I need to say something in defense of the world that did this to me, because I have promised you honesty and not bitterness, and because after 84 years, I have earned the right to hold two things at once in these old hands. The families who took my children were not thieves. They fed them, they clothed them, they raised them in the faith and loved the most of them as their own flesh. Little Eli's family in Indiana wept when he arrived. They were so glad of him. The community was not cruel. It was doing the only thing it knew how to do with a widow and 7 mouths in a year, when there was no other net beneath us at all. In a world with no money and no insurance and no help from the outside, the people are the only insurance there is. And I was collecting on that terrible policy, the one no one ever wants to have to use. And Eli, my husband, if he had lived, none of it would have happened. He did not choose to die under that wagon on the ice. No one in this story was a villain. Not the bishop, not the families, not the Ordnung, not even God, though I had words with him in that barn that I have never repeated to a living soul. That is what makes it so hard to lay it down. There's no one to blame, and so the grief has nowhere to go, and it has stayed with me all these years, quiet and cold and enormous, like a stone at the bottom of a well. I kept Sarah, I kept Mary, I kept Barbara, 3 of my 7, and I spent the next 30 years trying to be a whole mother to the children I had, while a piece of me rode away in every wagon that ever left my yard. I will tell you what became of them, briefly, because I know you are wondering, because a mother always knows you are wondering. Mose and Amos grew up in our district, and I did see them across that room every other Sunday. And when they were men, they came back to me, and we made a peace of sorts, though a boy raised by another woman calls that woman Mem. And I had to learn to answer to my own Christian name from my own sons. That is a strange grief, to be called by your name by a child who came out of your body. Little Eli in Indiana I did not see for 11 years. 11 years. When he came back, he was 17 and taller than his father had been, and he called me by my Christian name too, because he did not know what else to call me. And I did not correct him, because what right had I? Katie, the one who turned from the window, Katie was raised 3 farms over, close enough to see and far enough to lose. And Katie and I have had the hardest road of all, and that is all I will say about her here, because that story belongs to her as much as to me, and I will not spend it on this recording. When I left the old order many years later, long after my children were grown, and my hair had gone white, people asked me why. They expected me to say the dresses, or the buggies, or the rules, or the plainness of it all. It was none of those things. I loved the plainness. It was Sundays. It was a lifetime of Sundays spent looking across a room at children I had been made to give away, in a community that called that giving a blessing, and never once, not in 70 years, let me call it a grief. In therapy, late in my life, older than most people ever get before they sit in that chair, a young woman with kind eyes taught me a word I had never in my life been permitted to use. The word was mourn. She told me I had been made to give away 5 children, and had never once been allowed to mourn them, because mourning would have been pride, would have been questioning God's plan, would have been ingratitude toward a community that thought it was saving me. She told me a mother is allowed to grieve a child who is still living. I was 79 years old when I first heard that a person could grieve someone who had not died. I sat in that chair and I wept for a very long time, not for 3 days, the way you weep for the dead, for most of a year. For 5 children who were never dead, only gone, which I have learned is a different thing, and in some ways a harder one. Here is what I have come to know, and I offer it to you now, whoever you are, listening to an old woman in the last of her Sundays. They told me the community carried my burden, but a burden shared is still a burden carried, and mine I carried alone in the dark for 73 years, one child at a time, one wagon at a time. They told me choosing was a blessing. It was not a blessing. It was the cruelest thing a mother can be asked to do, dressed up in gentle words so that no one, not even me, was ever allowed to call it what it truly was. And I think that is the part the world outside never sees, the part hidden underneath all that plainness and peace. The hardest cruelties are not the loud ones. They are the quiet ones, handed to you with a kind voice and a bowed head, so gently that you thank the hand that wounds you. If you were ever made to choose between people you loved and told it was for the best, I see you. If you ever smiled and waved at a wagon while your heart broke behind your face, I see you. If someone called your grief a blessing, so that you would stop grieving where they could see it, I see you. And I am 84 years old. And I am telling you now what no one ever told me in all my long life. You are allowed to mourn. You are always allowed to mourn. No one ever had the right to take that from you. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments which part you are carrying tonight. And if you want more truth from behind the prayer cap, from a woman who has nearly seen the whole of a century, subscribe to Hannah the Amish girl. There is still so much I have not said. The Sundays, what 20 minutes cannot hold. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. The morning is yours if you decide it is.